So, good morning everyone. We are the Group 10 and we are here to discuss the organizational communication. But first, let us know the learning objectives. First is know the types of organizational communication. Second is understand why intrapersonal communication often is not effective. Third is learn how to increase your listening effectiveness. And lastly, learn ways to improve your communication skills. So we have here the types of communication. So to be effective employee, manager, client, or consultant, it is essential to communicate effectively with others. Having ideas, knowledge, or opinion is useless unless you can communicate those concepts with others. First, we have here the upward communication. Communication with an organization in which the direction of communication is from employees up to management. This upward communication is subordinates to superiors or of employees to manager. In this kind of communication, employees can speak directly to management. Ito yung tinatawag na open door policy. Pero sometimes, this upward communication may not be workable daw kasi madalas natitreten or natatakot daw yung mga employees. So next, we have here the serial communication. Communication passed consecutively from one person to another. So, serial communication is used to minimize the number of different people communicating with the top executive. For example, the message is relayed from an employee to her supervisor, then from supervisor to manager, then manager to boss, until the message reached the top. Another example, tayo sa section natin, di ba, may representative tayo, si Miss Come. So, para maiwasan yung pagbugso ng message kay Miss E or dun sa ating prof, nagbibigay tayo or binibigay natin yung concern natin kay Miss Come para isahang sabi na lang. But this serial communication relieves the top executive of excessive demands. It suffers several serious drawbacks. We have two. The first one is the content and the tone. It moves from one person to another, especially ang message is being passed orally from one person to another. Parang chismis lang, may dagdag, merong bawas. The second one is the bad news. And complaints are seldom relayed. It is because of the stress which associated kapag nagde-deliver tayo ng bad news. So to avoid this, meron tayong tinatawag na MOM or minimize unpleasant message effect. So remember to keep your presentation easy to read. Avoid overloading a slide with too many words and choose the color palette and won't distract the audience. So parang iba yung So dito, ang MOM daw is the idea that people prefer not to pass on unpleasant information, which the result that important information is not always communicated. From the word naman na it is used to minimize unpleasant message. The MOM effect daw is the best or excellent survival strategy dahil nga, as I've said earlier, minimize niya yung mga message because no one wants to be beard of the bad news. So next, we have here the communication channel. The communication by which a communication is transmitted. Communication channels are mediums through which you can send a message to its intended audience. For example, using phone calls, text messages, email, radio, and etc. So next, we have here the proximity. Physical distance between people. It is defined as two or more people being in the same location. Sabi din dito, proximity does not play a role when messages are communicated electronically using email kasi nga nasa parehas naman silang location or same location naman sila. Next, we have here the attitude survey, a form of upward communication in which a survey is conducted to determine employee attitudes about an organization. Dito pumapasok yung mga questionnaires about asking the employees to rate their opinions on such factors as satisfaction with pay, working conditions, and supervisors. Employees are also have opportunity, or they have the chance to list their complaints or suggestions that they want management to read. When the result came out, the manager or the company used this create their plan for coming years. And also, this attitude survey will be useful only if the organization or company take the results seriously. So we have here the suggestion boxes are common source of upward communication. This method of communication is hold on focus groups, which the consultants meets the current or new employees to get their opinion suggestions. Meron din tayo ng focus group and exit interviews. Yung exit interview naman, ito yung mga employees voluntarily leaving the organization or company, and sinasabi na maaari itong makapagbigay ng excellent source of information in terms of nag-exit voluntary si employee kasi naiinis siya sa manager or wala silang natututunan. So, next is the meron pa dito tayong suggestion boxes, a form of upward communication in which complaints are asked to place their suggestion in box. And the third one is the complaint box, a form of upward communication in which employees are asked to place their complaints in a box. So, these two boxes are the same. Ang pinagkaiba lang yung isa suggestion and yung isa naman is complaint from the word naman. These two boxes daw is the biggest advantage of employees kasi natatago nila or nasasabi nila kung ano yung gusto nilang sabihin anonymously. Kumbaga, natatago nila yung mga identity nila. It provides safe voice for subordinates and customers. So next is the third-party facilitators. First, we have here the liaison. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly. By the way, this person who acts as an intermediary between employees and management, or the type of employee who both sends and receives gratifying information. The second one is the ombudsperson, a person who investigates employee complaints and solve problems. So, alam naman na natin yan. So, the last one is the new one, na union steward. This is an employee who serves as a liaison between unionized employees and management. So, uulitin ko, pag sinabing liaison, ito yung person who acts as an intermediary between employees and management. So, tapos na tayo sa upward communication. Dito naman tayo sa downward communication. Downward communication, communication with an organization in which the direction of communication is from management to employees. This downward communication is considered a key method not only of keeping employees is informed but also the vital information needed by employees to perform their job. And ang original or origin ng downward communication is involved in newsletter kung saan it is designed to discuss the happy events such as freebies. The freebies is yung babies, birthdays, and the ball game score. Next is the bulletin boards, a method of downward communication in which an informal or relatively unimportant written information is posted in a public place. Kilala naman natin ito. Madalas nakikita rin natin ito sa mga schools. So the main use or the main purpose of this bulletin board is to communicate with non-related opportunities such as scholarship, optional meetings, and item for sale. So the third one is the policy manuals. A formal method of downward communication rules and procedures are placed in a manual, legally binding by a courts of law. This is the place where you can post important changes in a policy or procedure. Most of the manuals ay isinusulat in highly technical language, pero sinasabi rito na it should be also written in less technical style para ma-encourage yung mga employees na basahin ito, and as well as to make them easier to understand. Sinasabi rin dito na yung policy manuals is legally binding by courts of law, so it should be updated each time the policy changes. Lastly, we have here the newsletters, a method of downward communication typically used to communicate organizational feedback and celebrate employee success. So, as I've mentioned earlier, doon sa download communication, ang newsletter is designed to bolster the 3Bs, yung birthday, babies, and the ball game score. Newsletter is a good source of information in terms of celebrating employee success, if the organization is doing well, introducing new employees, and many more. Karamihan sa mga company, printed ang newsletter. Pero dahil may mga technologies na tayo, pwede na siyang isend electronically through email or internet. So, this is the end of my report. Thank you for listening.
So, hi everyone, I'm Sergeant Marie Pamatian and I'm going to discuss business communication. So, business communication is a transmission of business-related information among employees, management, and customers. Unlike upside and downward, business communication include, so, nasama na dito si customer kasi sa business sa upward and downward si management and employee lang ang magkausap, hindi nasasama si customer. Pero katulad nga ng from the words itself, dapat business related information lang. So merong business communication methods include memos, telephone calls, email, and voicemail. So sa memo, mas tinatawag siyang memo, pero ang tawag talaga sa kanya is memorandum. So, ang advantage niya is nakakapag-provide siya ng detailed information sa large number of people in a short period of time. Kaso, si memo ay hindi siya masyadong binabasa ng mga employees at napalitan na si memo ng email. So, telephone calls. The advantage of telephone calls is that nakakapag-usap kayo in person. Ay, hindi in person. I mean, hindi answering machine yung kausap mo or hindi mo lang basta binabasa yung mas madali siyang gamitin dahil nga mas mabibigay mo ng instruction ng mas maayos. Unlike sa email, diba, hindi naman lahat nasasabi mo sa email. So, meron tayong 5 phone etiquettes. So, use speakerphones properly. So, make sure na kapag naka-speakerphones ka, siguraduhin mo na gusto nung kasama mo na naka-speakerphone ka. And dapat, alam din nung kausap mo sa cellphone or sa phone na naka-loudspeaker siya or naka-speakerphone. So, do not use a cellphone to hold conversations in public. So, kung yung conversation mo ay hindi makapaghintay or importante siya, leave the room and go to a secluded area. So, turn off the ringer on your cellphone. So, ito yung pinakamali talaga ng mga tao. Ito yung problem. So, kapag pupunta ka ng meetings, public places, restaurant, church, please silent your phone. Kasi nakakabastos, nakakasayang ng oras, at yun. Yun nga. Nakakasayang ng oras at nakakabastos kapag ka nagre-ring yung phone. So, do not answer the phone when you have someone in your office. Kasi, syempre, may kausap ka na tao, tapos, diba? Pero kung importante naman siya, pwede ka rin namang mag-excuse. Basta sasabihin mo lang na importante yung tao, ay, yung kakausapin mo, and mag-apologize ka dun sa kasama mo sa office. So, use voicemail rather than call waiting during a business conversation. So, eto, yung voicemail kasi yung pinatawag na please message after the beep, yung ganun. So, may iwan lang yung message niya doon. Unlike pag nag-call wait siya, diba, antayin ka pa niyang tumawag. Importante ka. So, email and voicemail. So, most memos and telephone calls have been replaced with email, texting, and voicemail. So, mas ginagamit na nga to, diba? Yung sa business, sa mga company, mas madalas nang gamitin ng email and voicemail. So, ang advantage nito is naiiwasan natin yung pag-file ng mga papers and nakaka-avoid tayo ng small talk. Kaso, ang disadvantage naman nito is yung phone tag na tinatawag nila. Yung parang napapunta sa iba yung voicemail mo. And na-lessen yung personal contact mo sa ibang tao. Siyempre, answering machines lang yung kausap mo at puro basa-basa ka lang ng email. Hindi ka nagkakaroon ng parang communication skills. No? Ganun. Okay. So, nakalagay dyan, na-include ko dyan sa picture, sa PPT namin, kung paano gumawa ng tamang email. So, include, syempre, dapat may greetings ka and meron kang closing. Ilagay mo yung detailed subject line. Huwag kang susulat ng all caps or huwag kang magta-type ng all caps kasi baka sabihin nakasigaw ka or galit ka. So, kapag gusto mong i-forward yung email, palitan mo yung subject line, i-delete mo yung pangalan nung pinagsendan mo. For example, kay Villancero mo siya unang pinasa. Siyempre, buburahin mo yun at ipapalitan mo ng panibagong pangalan kung kanino mo siya isasend. Halimbawa, to Villancero nung una, diba? Kasi forward mo siya kay Suliva. Papalitan mo siya ng to Suliva. So, don't spend company time on personal emails. So, kapag ka-personal email, sa bahay mo na lang gawin. Or kapag ka-break time mo, kapag wala ka ng work, o kung day off mo, ganun, wag kapag nagtatrabaho ka. So, allow ample time for the receiver to respond. So, bigyan mo ng time na mag-respond yung pinagsenda mo ng email. Hindi lahat makakasagot agad-agad dahil hindi naman lahat free time katulad mo. When leaving a message on someone's voicemail, follow these guidelines. Kapag sa voicemail naman, speak slowly. Sabihin mo kung ano yung pangalan mo sa una at ulitin mo siya sa dulo. Spell mo yung pangalan mo, lalo na kapag mahirap siyang banggitin, i-spell, at kapag hindi ka familiar dun sa tao. Katulad ko, kapag nag-voicemail ako, for sure, i-spell ko yung pangalan ko kasi mahirap i-spell yung pangalan ko at mahirap na siya ibanggitin. So, leave your phone number kahit na meron na siya nun. Iwan mo pa din. So, to avoid phone tag, indicate some good times that the person can return your call. So, kung para na maiwasan yung mga phone tag, sabihin mo na pwede siyang tumawag pabalik or pwede kanyang kontakin pabalik. So, don't ramble. Anticipate the anticipate the possibility of getting voicemail rather than talking to the actual person and have a short message ready. So, may possible kasi dito na voicemail lang din ang may-receive mo. Diba? So, anin mo na yung sarili mo. Kasi, yeah. Don't include information that you don't want other people to hear. So, kung hindi naman yung information na banggitin mo, yun lang yung ibigay mo. Huwag ka na magdagdag ng another pa, tapos hindi ka naman sure kung gusto marinig ng tao, diba? So, business meetings. So, business meetings, these are common methods of business communication. Is the dreaded committee meeting. Research indicates that the typical employees, so yung mga employee daw, ay nagsispend ng 4 to 5 hours. Sabi natin 4 to 5 hours sa pag-attend ng meetings at 3 to 4 meetings kada linggo. Kapag ka naman supervisor, syempre, mas higher the position, mas maraming meetings ang ina-attend. Yung iba is nagsispend ng 5 to 6 hours and 5 to 6 meetings in a week at 6 to 7 hours yung tinatagal nila doon. Pero depende yon. So, office design. To facilitate employee communication, 70% of the organization have adopted what is formally called an open landscape office design. So, halos lahat kasi or 70% ng mga company is ginagamit na yung ganito. Ayan kung nakikita niyo yun sa picture, ganyan yung ginagamit nila. Bakit? Mas madali kasi makipag-communicate kapag nakaganyan. Hindi katulad ng iba na hindi ko sure kasi kung may mga ganong klaseng office design na yung may kwarto-kwarto pa. Ganon. Yung hindi nakaganyan na, yung tipo may kwarto talaga. Ganon. Mas madali kasi kapag ganyan, tipong, bawa gusto mo, kausapin mo na yung sa kabila, tatayo ka lang, tapos sabihin mo na, uy, pass mo na yung ganito, ganyan. Ganito nga, kala mo bibigyan ganito, ganon. Ganon. So, informal communication. Informal information is transmitted through grapevine, a term that can be traced back to the Civil War when loosely hung telegraph wires resembled grapevines. The communication across these lines was often distorted. Informal siya na pagsasabi ng information o ng impormasyon. Natatransmit daw siya through grapevine and mababanggit ko mamaya kung ano yung grapevine. So, sige. So, grapevine. Grapevines are common because they provide employees information, power, and entertainment. So, yun nga na, bukod sa nakakapag-provide nga siya ng information, kaso yun nga lang informal information yun, sa kagaya ng sabi ko kanina. So, nakakapag siya ng entertainment dun sa, mamaya-maya, mababanggit ko kung bakit siya ng entertainment. Not surprisingly, the prevalence of email, texting, and social media has increased the importance of grapevine. So, Davies studied the grapevine and established the existence of 4 grapevines patterns. So, pinag-aralan niya and ginawa niya yung mga patterns inano niya yung existence ng 4 na patterns ng grapevine. So, meron tayong single strand grapevine, possibility grapevine, probability grapevine, and cluster grapevine. So, paano nga ba gumagana itong mga klase ng grapevine na to? So, makikita niyo sa picture, yan. Diyan tayo magbe-base, diba? And, syempre, magbe-base din tayo dito sa So, single strand grapevine, ganito siya po, kaya siya naging maganda yung office design kasi pwedeng gawin to, yung single strand grapevine na yan. Halimbawa, sa akin galing yung message, diba? Sa akin galing yung message, ipapasa ko kay Villancero, ipapasa kay Saliba, ipapasa kay Lad. Ganon. Sa gossip grapevine naman, naggrupo kaming 4, diba? O, sa akin galing yung chismis. Sasabihin ko sa kanilang 3. Ganon. Ganon naman yung gossip grapevine. Typical na gossip. So, another one is the probability grapevine. So, galing sa akin yung message, diba? Nagsabi lang ako sabihin na nating 2, kay Lad tsaka kay Villancero. Tapos, sila at si Villancero, may 2 din silang friends na sinabi din nila yung information. So, kumakalat yung yung chismis or yung information. So, cluster grapevine. So, sabihin na natin, may iilan lang akong sinabihan. Tapos, yung iilan na yon, meron ding iilan na sinabihan. So, syempre, tuloy-tuloy yun. Imposible din kasi na hindi babanggitin ng isa pa or hindi mababanggit ng ibang. So, isolates were employees who received less than half of the information. So, si isolate, yun nga, kagaya na nabanggit ko, half lang ng information ang natatanggap niya. Hindi katulad ni liaison na nakakatanggap siya ng maraming informations at pinapasa niya to sa iba. While si dead enders naman, siya yung employee na parang katulad siya ni liaison, ang kaibahan niya lang, hindi niya to pinapasa sa sa other employee or minsan niya lang ito maipasa. So, from the word dead enders, 'di ba? Sa kanya huling mananatili yung gossip kasi nasa kanya yung pinaka dead end eh. So, gossip is primarily about individuals, and the content of the message lacks significance to the people gossiping. Ito yung tinatawag na chismisan na wala namang kabuluhan. 'Di ba? Walang kabuluhan yung mga pinagchichismisan nila. So, unlike siya kayong rumor, si rumor kasi kahit papano merong kabuluhan at merong merong content yung sinasabi niya. Kumbaga ito yung klase ng information na may kabuluhan, may matututunan ka, ganon. So, next is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication involves the exchange of a message across a communication channel from one person to another. The interpersonal communication process begins with the sender encoding and transmitting a message across a communication channel and ends with another person receiving and decoding the message. So, sa interpersonal communication, nagkakaroon tayo ng exchange of conversation with someone. So, magsisimula daw siya kay sender. Kunwari, ako sa sender, tas ipapasa ko siya kay receiver, di ba? So, akong sender, sasabihin ko yung message. Tapos, magkakaroon ng communication channel at mapapasa siya kay receiver. Tapos, si receiver, i-encode niya and i-decode niya yung message na ibinigay ko. Ganon. So, dito, nagkakaroon tayo ng problem. So, problem area number 1 is intended message versus message sent. So, for effective communication, the sender must know what she wants to say and how she wants to say it. So, dapat alam mo kung paano mo siya sasabihin at kung ano yung gusto mong sabihin. So, interpersonal communication problems can occur when the message person sends is not the message she intended. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng problema kapag hindi natin intention na yun ang sabihin natin. Kasi nagkakamali tayo eh. Pero, meron ako dito 3 solusyon para maano yung problem na to. So, we have thinking about what you want to communicate. So, dapat, bago ka makipag-usap or bago mo sabihin yung gusto mong sabihin, dapat alam mo na sa sarili mo kung ano yung dapat mong sasabihin sa kausap mo. So, for example na lang natin is yung pag-order sa Jollibee or McDo or sa any restaurant. So, pag nag-order kasi ako, based on my experience na lang, pag ako kasi, mahiyain kasi ako. And, di lang halata. Mahiyain ako. And, kapag may ganun klaseng, like, mag-order na ako, sobra-sobra na yung kaba ko. So, ang ginagawa ko, pinag-iisipan ko na sa utak ko kung ano yung dapat kong sabihin. Halimbawa, nasa utak pa lang, gusto kong orderin is 1 piece chicken and Coke Zero. Ganon. Tapos, eto na pumapasok yung solution number 2, which is practice what you want to communicate. So, diba, alam ko na kung ano yung sasabihin ko. E di ngayon, ulit-ulitin ko siya. 1 piece chicken and 1 large Coke Zero. 1 piece chicken, 1 large Coke Zero. Yun. Tapos ulit-ulitin ko lang yan hanggang sa makalating ako sa cashier at ma-execute ko na maayos yung sasabihin ko. Ganon. Ganon ako lagi. Pero, kung gusto mo na hindi ka na mag-iisip and hindi ka na magpa-practice, pag-aralan mo tong pangatlong solution na ibibigay ko, which is learn better communication skills. So, dapat meron kang better communication skills. Why? Ang advantage kasi nito, hindi mo na kailangan mag-practice and at the same time, confident ka na sa sasabihin mo kasi marunong ka makipag-communicate sa tao. Wala ako neto. Yun. kapag ang laki-laking advantage kapag marunong kang makipag-communicate sa tao at marunong kang I mean kapag ka confident ka sa lahat ng sasabihin mo. So next, problem number 2, message sent versus message received. So even though an individual knows what she wants to say and says it exactly as she plans, many factors affect how that message is received. So, dito naman, kahit pa katulad ng ginagawa ko, kahit pa sabihin ko na na-practice ko siya, na-execute ko siya ng maayos, hindi ibig sabihin nun na yung na-receive nung babae or nung tao, ng receiver mo is may intindihan ka, 'di ba? Halimbawa, may mga tendency kasi na parang iba yung pagkakaintindi niya or meron tayong tinatawag na parang barricade ba tawag dun? Basta yung parang siya, barrier, yun, barrier, kumbaga, halimbawa, sabihin natin, maingay sa labas kaya hindi niya ako naintindihan. May mga ganong scenario. So, we have, wait lang. So, meron ako dito mga examples on how, so, meron ako dito na mga reasons or factors kung bakit nga naaapektuhan yung pag-receive ng message. So, number 1 is the actual words used. So, particular word may mean one thing in one situation but something else in another. So, merong klase tayo, may mga kasi 'di ba? May mga words tayo na may ibang words kasi na para siya doon pero iba din yung meaning niya. For example, itong words na lang yung i-example ko. Yung basa, tas yung basa. So, yung basa, 'di ba, to read 'yon. Tapos yung basa is yung wet, 'di ba? Magkaiba siya, pero same lang sila ng spelling and same lang siya ng pagkakasabi. Though yung tono niya magkaiba. May ganon. So, check ko lang. May another pa akong example na nakita ko sa book. So, meron dito, ang example niyang word is fine. So, kapag sinabi daw na you had a fine jewelry, so, iti-take mo siya as a compliment. Ano sinabi niya, maganda yung jewelry mo eh. Parang ganon, ang labas niya. Pagka naman dinidescribe siya sa weather, sabihin natin ang sinabi niya is, the weather here in Philippines is just fine. Ganon. Ibig sabihin, nagbibigay pa rin siya ng positive connotation. However, paano kapag yung tinanong ka kung, how was the dinner I cooked? Tapos, ang sinagot mo, fine. Diba? It's fine, yung ganon, char. Parang, ang dating kasi sa iba nun is parang hindi siya ganon kaganda or hindi siya ganon kasarap, ganon. Kasi, fine lang yung ginamit mong words, pwede mo naman sabihin, it's good, it's nice. Bakit sasabihin mo pang how, it's fine. Ganon. So, another term is yun lang. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Crystal May Suliva and I'm going to discuss the continuation of problem area 2, which is the message sent versus the message received. So, gender differences in communication. So, Deborah Tannen in 1995 and 2001 says that gender is another factor related to the use of words. So, he believed that the man and the woman speaks very different languages and have a different communication style. So, according to the figure, So, men usually talk about major global events, while in the other hand, women talk about daily life. Sabi pa, though the man tells the main point while the woman provide details. And men are more direct and women are more indirect. So, and so on and so forth. Communication channel. Information can be communicated in a variety of ways such as orally, non-verbally, through a second party, or through a written medium such as a letter or a memo. So, magkakaroon ng problema ang isang communication base sa resulta ng communication channel na itinransmit. Pwedeng ma-interpret ng in a different ways base sa channel na ginamit. So, for example is yung employee, pwedeng maiba yung interpretation or maiba yung message na marireceive niya or may interpret niya if yung message is communicated into a memo or email kaysa sa face-to-face. So, noise can be defined as any interference that affects proper reception of a message. An obvious example is actual auditory noise. Noise is a variable concerning or affecting the channel that interferes with the proper reception of a message. So, ang example natin dito is actual auditory noise such as yung trend or yung ingay ng paligid. Yun siya. Nonverbal cues. What we communicate is conveyed by nonverbal means or words, often and say anything but our action says another. So, much of what we communicate is conveyed by nonverbal means. So, meron tayong 5 categories, which is the body language, paralanguage, use of space, use of time, and artifacts. Body language, how we move and position our body or our body language communicate much to other people. So, ang sabi, for example, if meron kang kausap, then yung body mo is nakaharap doon mismo sa nagsasalita, ibig sabihin nun is gusto mo yung tao. Unlike sa hindi ka nakaharap habang kausap mo siya, ibig sabihin nun is dislike o hindi mo gusto or wala kang interest doon sa taong yun. So, meron pang example is kapag nakikipag eye-to-eye contact, yun, sabi is the person is interested. Or yung casual talk, yan. While the lack of eye contact can mean many things, including disinterest, walang interest yung tao, and discomfort and embarrassment. So, use of space. The ways people make use of space provides nonverbal cues about their feelings and personality. They say that dominant people or those who have authority are given more space by others and at the same time take place for another. For example na is yung sa mga fast food chain. Diba, meron doon na parang for staff only, yung mga ganon. So, to those who have authority, sila lang yung pwedeng pumasok doon. Sila lang yung pwedeng gumamit ng space na yon. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng use of space. Next is intimacy zone. The extends from physical contacts to 18 inches away from a person and is usually reserved for close relationship such as dates, spouses, and family. So, ang intimacy zone is a distance zone where only people na close friends, meron kayong close relationship, is yun lang yung may karapatan, they're allowed to enter your space, yung sa zone mo. So, yun nga, example is yung spouses, family. Next is personal distance zone. This is the range from 18 inches to 4 feet away from a person and is it second is the distance usually reserved for friends and acquaintances. Ito naman is, yung zone mo na to is naka-reserve doon sa mga friends mo or doon sa bago mo lang kakila or acquaintances. Social distance zone is from 4 feet to 12 feet away and is a distance typically observed when dealing with business people and stranger. And finally, the public distance zone is range from 12 feet to 25 feet away and is characteristics such as large group interaction as lecture and seminars. A person that is typically the interpersonal space allowed for social interactions such as large lectures, seminars. Next is para-language. It involves the way we say things and consists of variables such as tones, tempo, volume, number, and duration of pauses, and rate of speech. So sabi, the message or a message that is spoken quickly will be received differently from the one that is spoken slowly. And according to research, ang sabi is kapag daw ikaw mabilis magsalita, ikaw daw is matalino or friendly or enthusiastic. So on the other hand, the slow rates of speech is kabaliktaran ng ng mga mabibilis magsalita. So they tend to be more like introvert, yun. And sabi rin kapag daw men with high-pitched voices are considered to be weak. So, kapag daw gumagamit sila ng high pitch, ang mga lalaki is sila daw is mahina. At daw yung mga taong nagsisinungaling, they talk less or ulit-ulit yung sinasabi. And nagkakaroon ng crack or mayroong tension yung kanilang voices kaysa dun sa sa nagsasabi ng totoo. Sila yung parang confident magsalita. Sabi, simple changes in tones used to communicate a message can change the entire meaning of a message. Pwedeng mabago yung entire meaning ng message depende sa ginagamit mong tone or ginagamit mong tempo, volume, number, and duration of pauses. Next is artifacts. Artifacts, a final element of nonverbal communication, concerns the object or artifacts that a person wears or with which she surrounds herself. Kapag daw yung tao is nagsusot ng bright and colorful clothes, sila daw yung meron silang pagkakaiba to those who wear white, black, gray clothes. So, masasabi daw yung mga suot ng white or gray, black, sila daw yung mga conservative. So, if people surround themselves with things such as clothes, jewelry, decorations, that communicate information about the person. So, for example, yung taong may salamin, so, may isip natin na matalino siya kaysa dun sa walang salamin. Next is the open desk arrangement. Open desk arrangement is faces a desk against a wall so that a visitor can sit next to the person who sits behind the desk. So, ang open desk arrangement is yung visitor is katabi mo. At yung closed desk arrangement naman is kabaliktaran ng open desk. So, places a desk so that visitor must sit across to the person behind the desk. So, visitors are usually use open rather than closed desk. Ang visitor is ginagamit nila yung open desk arrangement. So, they seems more comfortable and friendlier, more trustworthy and interested and especially extroverted, friendly. Kasi sa closed desk arrangement, parang dumidistansya kasi. Parang may distance between the visitors and dun sa someone na kausap niya. Next is amount of information. The amount of information contained in a message can affect the accuracy with which it is received. So, kapag ang message is nagko-contain ng more information that we can hold in the memory, the information becomes leveled, sharpened, and assimilated. Leveled is describe a message from which unimportant information details have been removed. Ibig sabihin, bago mo maipasa yung information, tinatanggal mo na, nire-remove mo na yung mga unimportant information details. So, bago mo siya sabihin sa iba. So, nile-level mo siya. Next is sharpened. When you sharpen the information, interesting and unusual information is kept. Ito yung kapag isasalin mo na yung ipapasa mo yung information, parang naka-highlight na siya. Yung mga sa tingin mo is yung mga unusual information or yung mga interesting na details, yun yung pinapasa mo. Next is assimilate. When you assimilate the information, it is modified to fit your existing beliefs and knowledge. So, a description of a message which the information has been modified to fit the existing belief and knowledge. Sa sarili mong beliefs, ang mga umiinom is pangit ugali. Napapangitan ka ng ugali. So, kapag ipapasa mo yung information sa ibang tao, sasabihin mo na imbis na lasinggero yun, sasabihin mo pangit na yung ugali niya. Kasi yun yung paniniwala mo. Nagkakaroon ng magkaiba yung perception or belief sa pagpapasa ng information. So, next is reaction to communication overload. So, communication overload can occur when an employee receives more communication that he can handle. So, when an employee is overloaded, she can adapt or adjust in several ways to reduce her stress. So, this is the omission, error, queuing, escape, using a gatekeeper, or using multiple channels. So, ito yung iba. First is omission. This is a conscious decision not to process certain types of information. For example, kapag busy ka sa paperworks mo or sa ACADS. So, kapag may tumatawag sa'yo ng kaibigan mo, hindi mo yun sasagutin. Kasi nga, ang goal mo is matapos mo yung paperworks, sarili mong desisyon na hindi mo gawin yung isang bagay. Kasi nga, meron kang mas importante na ginagawa. So, ito yung one of the communication overload. No? Para hindi ka ma-stress na nagsasabay-sabay. No? Mas po-focus ka sa goal mo na ito muna yung gagawin mo. Next is error. The employee attempts to deal with every message she received. The processing errors are not intentional but result from processing more than he can handle. So from the word error. So this is a standard of quality. This is the type of response to communicate overload that involves processing all information but processing some of it incorrectly. So, for example nito is, nag-review ka. So, confident ka sa araw ng exam na masasagot mo yung lahat. So, yung time na ng exam, excited ka. Sinagutan mo na lahat. Hindi mo binabasa yung instruction. Ito yung kadalasan na nangyayari sa mga estudyante. So, ang nangyari nun, nasagutan mo na, naipasa mo na nagkaroon ka ng error or na meron kang na-miss na something na importante. Ibig sabihin, imbis na ma-perfect mo yung exam, naka-zero ka. Kasi mayroong error na nangyari na meron kang nakaligtaan. So, yun yung error. Next is queuing. So, queuing is a placing the work into a queue or waiting line. The order of the queue can base on such variables as the message importance, timeliness, or sender. For example is yung company president, nag-send siya ng memo. So, kailangan kapag nag-send siya ng memo, dapat makikita mo agad kasi important siyang tao. Unlike sa mga hindi masyadong importante, sila yung mga nasa dulo na or nasa nilalagay mo sa gilid, ganun, or sa hindi mo agad-agad makikita. Piniplace mo siya sa hindi mo basta-basta nakikita. Kasi sila yung hindi masyadong importante para sa'yo. For example, yung mga salesperson, sila yung mga nasa dulo ng queue eh. Sila yung mga nasa waiting line. So, mas inuuna yung mga mas nakakataas na posisyon kaysa sa mga mas mababa. Next is escape. If communication overload is prolonged, a common employee response is to escape. So from the word itself, escape. So this response certainly is not beneficial to an organization, but it can be beneficial to an employee if it protects her mental and physical health by relieving stress. So, for example is, nai-stress na yung isang employee na maraming nangyayari sa buhay niya. So, nagdesisyon siya na umalis o mag-leave doon sa organization para ma-reduce yung stress niya. So, nag-escape sila. I mean, it means tumatakas sila or umaalis sila sa isang sitwasyon para ma-reduce yung stress nila. Next is gatekeeper. A response to communication overload used by many executives is the use of gatekeeper, a person who screens potential communication and allows only the most important to go through. So, ang example dito is mostly mga receptionist and secretaries. Yan. Secretary ito yung obvious examples natin. Sila yung mga gatekeeper. So, yung person who have potential communication and allows only the most important. And lastly, multiple channels. The final coping response to communication overload is the use of multiple channels. With this strategy, an organization reduces the amount of communication going to one person by directing some of it to another. So, this is a strategy for coping with communication. So, which an organization reduces the amount of communication going to one person by directing some of it another person. For example is yung owner ng small restaurant or small business. So, hinahandle niya lahat ng problema involving yung customers, employees, finances, lahat yun handled ng isang owner ng isang small restaurant. Pero kapag yung business is lumago, yung mga problema hindi na kayang i-handle ng owner. Sabihin, mag-hire siya ng ibang tao para mag-handle sa finances, mag-handle sa customers, mag-handle sa employees. Yun yung multiple channels. So, knowing and understanding this list of overload occurs, employees will react in ways that to increase or to reduce the stress. So, some of these strategies, yung omission, error, escape, result of negative consequences of the organization. Ang organization, they must recognize when the overload is acceptable strategy. So, kailangan nilang ma-identify kung yun bang sinasabi nila is acceptable o hindi. So that's it, my discussion. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine Maylad and my report is factor affecting the message received versus the message interpret. Listening skills. Listening is probably the most important communication skill that a supervisor should master. In a study of managers, Nichols and Steven 1957 found that 70% of white-collar workday is spent in communicating, and 9% is spent in writing, the 16% in reading, and 30% is in speaking, and the 45% in listening. And the managers is spending the time listening than any other thing or single activity. Styles of listening. The styles of listening is the most important thing we can do, and to recognize that every person has a particular listening styles and that serve as a communication filter. Geyer and Downey have developed a test, and that is attitudinal listening profile. The attitudinal listening profile is the test and to measure an employee's listening styles. In attitudinal listening profile have six main style of listening, and that is leisure, inclusive, stylistic, technical, emphatic, and non-conforming. The first one is leisure. In leisure listening, this is the person who cares about only interesting information and words that indicate pressure. Next is inclusive. The inclusive listening, this is the person who cares about only the main point of a communication. The third one is stylistic listening. This is the person who pays attention mainly to the way the communication is presented. In technical listening, this is the person who cares about only facts and details without hearing the meaning of those details. In emphatic listening, this is the person who cares about the feelings of the speaker and most likely to pay attention to verbal cues. And to the last one is non-conforming listening. This is the person who cares about only information and that is consistent with their thinking. In tips for effective listening, there's have an emotional state. The emotional state is the interpretation of a message can certainly be affected by the receiver's emotional state. Second is cognitive ability. The cognitive ability is another factor that can affect the way in which a received message is interpreted. And the last is bias, or biases obviously affect our ability to interpret information we receive. Improving employee communication skills. The organization are always looking for employees with excellent communication skills. The difficulty in finding such employees was recently exemplified by the experience of a nation insurance company. And in the improving employee communication skills, there's have a intrapersonal communication skills. The intrapersonal communication skills is one of the most common methods used to increase interpersonal communication skills. And the training workshop conducted by an outside consultant or a company trainer. Next is written communication skills. The written communication skills is attempts to improve the quality of written communication have generally taken two paths. The last is improving writing. With increased use of informal email and texting, effective writing skills are more essential than ever. Readability. Written communication can break down when material is too difficult for many employees to read. Here are some examples of readability. First is Federal Aviation Administration regulation, and many airline company pilots associations agreements are too difficult for pilots to read. Second is corporate annual reports are too difficult for most adults to understand. The last one is the position analysis questionnaire. It also difficult for the most job incumbents to read. Readability. In readability, each index uses a slightly different formula or method. First is Frye readability graph, a method of determining the readability level of written material by analyzing sentence length and the average number of syllables per word. Second is Fletch index. The Fletch index is a method of determining the readability level of written material by analyzing average sentence length and the number of syllables per 100 words. Last is FAG index, a method of determining the readability level of written materials by analyzing sentence length and the number of free style word.